Hey everyone, Nick here from another BookTube channel, and today I'll be reviewing Perfume, the Story of a Murderer by Patrick Suskind. I'm going to assume this video performs poorly because people are going to see the word perfume in the title and think like, oh, perfume, I'm not interested in that, that sounds boring, that video probably stinks. Sorry, I figured it was best to just get that out of the way early. Moving on. Perfume is set in 18th century France and is the fictional life story of Jean-Baptiste Grenouille. Grenouille is an orphan who has been born with an uncanny sense of smell. Basically, he's like a human bloodhound. He's able to isolate odors no matter how cluttered the landscape around him, and he can store individual odors in like a sensual memory bank so that he can recall those smells at any time. The grand irony here is that although Grenouille can detect and track someone by their smell from miles away, he himself gives off no scent. This makes him want to be a murderer! No, really, that is essentially true. See, because he loves smell so much, to the point where he only learns how to speak so that he can assign words to the things that he smells, Grenouille naturally gravitates towards becoming a perfumer. As a young man, he learns the trade of creating scents and how to distill the scent of any object, living or non, into a perfume. His ultimate plan is to use these skills to distill the most perfect human scents that he can, just so he can have them all to himself. Perfume sounds a lot more disturbing than it actually is, and I think that's ultimately why I didn't enjoy it that much. For being the story of a murderer, there is very little murdering to be done throughout the book. I would say that maybe modern horror has ruined me, but Perfume was written in 1985 when literary horror was already big and bloody, so I don't think I would have felt any differently reading it back then. A more representative title of the content would have been Perfume, the Story of Perfume, because that is truly what the main focus is here. So much of this book is just extremely detailed explanations on how to make perfume in the 18th century. The tools, the ingredients, the formulas, the process are all covered in excruciating detail, which to some might be very interesting, but it wasn't to me. I get the sense that the author did a lot of research into the perfume making process while writing this book, and he basically said, if I had to learn it, so do you. But I didn't really want a lesson in perfume making. I wanted to read about murders. At the halfway point, I was becoming really impatient, and if the book was longer than, say, 300 pages, I probably would have DNF'd it. As it stands, it was about 260 pages, so I stuck it out, and finally, with about a quarter of the book left, we finally got some murders. But even then, it was unfulfilling. Honestly, it kind of reads like a classic horror novel, like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or a short story by Edgar Allan Poe, in which there's a whole lot of setup, and then there's one big scare, and that's kind of it. This book is a bit of a one-trick pony, and it doesn't really offer anything beyond what is advertised by its title. I imagine if you're not a horror reader and you just pick this up as literary fiction, which if you do get this book from a Barnes & Noble, it's in the fiction section, not horror, then you might be shocked by it. But for those of us who've cut our teeth on Stephen King and Friday the 13th movies, this is pretty tame. Perfume is a very well-written instruction manual on how to make perfume in the 18th century, with occasional forays into the mind of a serial killer. I was on board with it for the first quarter, and then it lost me for the next half, and then it got my attention again for that last quarter. But also, the climax of this book ventures so far into the absurd that I wonder if it was meant to be kind of darkly comical. I mean, when I was reading it, I did that thing where you go like, it's an easy enough read, though I did find myself skimming a lot of it when it was obviously just going to be pages on pages of technical detail. Ultimately, I was pretty disappointed by this book, and my arbitrary and subjective grade of Perfume, the Story of a Murderer, is 5 out of 10. Do with that what you will. What are your thoughts on Perfume? Was there enough murder for you? And most importantly, what are some of your favorite smells? I am particularly fond of fresh-baked cookies. Let me know in the comments. Thank you for spending some time with me today, but now it's time to get back to reading.